Okay, we are going to start our chapter 6 in social studies, lesson 1. And we are going to look at what I like about this lesson is it's talking about our nation and how it grows. Last time we were in our social studies books, we talked about early explorers and settling our land and starting our government and the 13 colonies, and things have really grown. And when we last left off, we were reading a leveled reader about Thomas Jefferson, and we learned that he made the Louisiana Purchase. And so our nation is growing, okay? Things are changing. So you're going to have this slideshow to look through, and we're going to read pages 190 through 194. We're going to look at different ways of traveling. So I'm just going to kind of talk about some of these, but you're going to have a Google form worksheet that goes with those pages that you'll need to read, okay? So, like I mentioned earlier, we have in pink here was our original United States. We have the 13 colonies along the east, along the Atlantic. Okay, we eventually got into the Indiana Territory and some other territories here, and then we acquired what's called the Louisiana Purchase here in the purple, okay? So our nation, our United States, doubled in size. Okay, now we still don't own this over here, but it's coming. Okay, so when we talk about settlers who were first here, we know they were the Native Americans who lived here. Okay, they traveled mainly by foot. Okay, they walked around. They did have some very primitive or simple boats, okay, that they used. And when the Europeans come, they bring horses on their boats. So that's how horses became more and more prominent into the means of travel at that time. So we're talking about the early 1800s at this time. Lewis and Clark are the two guys in the picture here, and you'll read a little bit about them in your sections too. But they are assigned a mission by Thomas Jefferson, who was the president at the time, to explore this new territory, this Louisiana Purchase, okay? And they take 48 other guys with them, and they also take Sacagawea. We've talked about her a few times in the fall when we were talking about Native Americans, but she was able to help them understand the languages of the Native Americans who at this point were living where it was pink, and settlers had pushed them west into that purple area. So she's going to help them communicate as they're going through their territory. They start in St. Louis here, okay, where they set up camp, and you'll see they head west, kind of northwest. You follow that all the way up through to the blue area that you'll see out west, okay? So we talk about their journey, we talk about traveling by foot, and horses are introduced, okay? And then we learn about our next means of travel, which is a big one. We took our field trip and looked at the Wabash River, and we learned its importance of transportation, because as the country is growing, we need a way to move products, okay, from one area to the other. And we find that moving along waterways can be even faster than moving heavy loads of things with horses or walking, okay? So rivers and canals become a very important part of travel. And when you talk about canals, I think what the amazing thing you have to think about is a canal is a man-made waterway. And especially when you're thinking about 1840, 1850, they didn't have huge excavators and bulldozers and any kind of machinery. They were digging with a shovel. So I want you to think about if you went out in your yard and you tried to dig and dig and dig and dig, could you dig deep enough to create a waterway for a barge to float down? Okay, so these guys worked very, very hard. And you'll see that Lake Erie right here was a major waterway to help connect lots of canals. You see all these little reds, okay, were some dug canals, okay, and they're all labeled down here. We're looking at the Erie Canal right here, number 1, okay, And then right here, you'll see we decide to dig from Lake Erie, okay, through the top part of Ohio, and we hook into the Wabash River, which is what goes through Indiana. And if you ever go by through Delphi, Indiana, you'll see there's the Wabash and Erie Canal. Okay, and I put a sign here. And I think what's neat about this is it's 460 miles. That's a lot of digging, okay, that started in Ohio, and it actually goes all the way down, when you think about where it flows, through to Evansville. It's the longest canal built in the United States. Okay, so I think that's kind of a neat thing. And then this picture just shows horses kind of guiding a barge through a canal. I always like old pictures and history, so I think that's a neat picture to show you. So you'll read about that. You'll also start reading about wagon trains, because as we discover that horses, when they first come, we're just riding them. Then we decide, okay, if we have the invention of the wheel and the axle, okay, we can understand, I can make wagons. I can make things that I can carry rocks. I can carry things and move and clear land. And I can carry my goods and produce and things like that in wagons. All right, and they call them wagon trains because when they moved from one area to the next, you'll see in this picture I posted, kind of looks like a train the way they travel. A team of horses, the wagon with goods. Some people will walk, some people will just ride horses, but they will travel often in groups, and so it looks like a train. So wagon trains become our next idea of transportation as we continue to modernize through history. We also discover at this point with more wagons, it's bumpy if you don't have a smooth surface to travel. And so to make things easier, because we continue to go from these 13 colonies westward, okay, we decide Congress lets us build what's called a national road. Now, it's not a road like you and I travel on today, but it is a road nonetheless, where things are a little bit smoother, at least for wagons to travel. So it connects the East Coast all the way through Indiana and Illinois. So that little red, white, and blue kind of shows you the first national road that was built. Okay, so that helps, again, move people westward in a safer and faster way. Then we discover railroads and steam engines. And this is when things get even faster. Again, on our field trip, if you remember, we talked about the Wabash River, but right next to the river was the railroad. And railroads were often next to waterways because, again, goods and services could be loaded on and off of trains to get things where they needed to be. But this changed things dramatically. We're talking about from the East Coast to the West Coast of our United States, it would have taken 6 months if you're talking about traveling with horse and wagons. And now we're building railroad tracks and we're traveling by train, and now we're going 6 days. That is a huge improvement. So with that coming, okay, people are excited. People are all about traveling on railways. Now, it was expensive, okay, but the speed of it made up for so many things that they didn't have before. The first steam locomotive, okay, which means train, was built in 1804. Okay, so they kept improving and improving. And then about the time of the Civil War, we're talking about 1863, that's when they decide, we've kind of expanded this far in our country, but if we want to keep going westward, because this is all becoming part of the United States, we need to connect our railroad. We already have one that gets us to Omaha, but we have nothing to get us from this point on. So we think, okay, if I have a crew start here and I have a crew start here, we're just going to work until we meet in the middle, okay? And this is called the Transcontinental Railroad. And that means it's covering the entire continent here, okay? And trans is a prefix meaning travel, okay? So we notice that right here, they've labeled that promontory, and that is where the two railroads met. And they put a golden spike there, and you'll see that in one of the videos I posted too, okay? You notice this side worked a lot faster because this is flatter land. Think about it again. We're talking about no equipment at this point, shovels, pickaxes, horses. That's what they had to do this with. We have to go through the mountains on the west side. So imagine cutting through a mountain with just handheld tools and horses. Okay, a lot of work goes into the modern things that we have today. Okay, so from the railroad, we upgrade to vehicles. I love these old pictures. I cannot imagine riding in a car like this. How cold and dusty this would be if you had to ride on cars like this. But we're talking now about the first cars. Okay, and this is a Model T up here, Henry Ford. All right, and so they start building highways. All right, and this is in the early 1900s we're talking about when these things start. And then finally, to the sky. Look at these airplanes. Could you imagine? You couldn't pay me to sit on one of these. It would scare me to death. But we talk about the Wright brothers, which I'm sure you've heard that name before. And in early 1900, actually in 1903, the first airplane flew. Okay, actually one of the Wright brothers you'll learn about in your video was from Indiana, lived in Indiana, which I think is kind of cool. So anyway, you'll read those pages in our social studies again. First part of chapter 6, I think they're pretty interesting, 190 through 194. I just kind of recapped on these slides what you'll listen to, okay? And then you will see a Google form of some questions you'll want to answer, and there's 2 YouTube videos that will go with this, and you'll learn a little bit more. All right, enjoy.